If you have been around Kenyans and Tanzanians, and most probably you are a foreigner, you will know that Tanzanians take pride in being the politest Swahili speakers, while the Kenyans will be accused of being too loud, westernized with poor Swahili dialects. There is a rivalry between the citizens of these two countries that dates back hundreds of years and should not be taken at face value, as the stereotypes are deep-rooted. I say stereotypes because they're Kenyans who speak good Swahili, and Tanzanians who speak good English. The issue of politeness, I leave it to the beholder, as well as the issue of laziness or hard work, being a go-getter, loud or quiet. It depends on how you as an individual define them. The rivalry between them has always taken different shapes at an international center stage, and sometimes Mount Kilimanjaro has been a victim. The contest as to whether Mount Kilimanjaro is in Kenya or Tanzania has turned out to be very emotional. But the issue is not the mountain or in which country it is found. It is the historical differences that emerged as these two countries gained independence from their colonial masters. Kenya and Tanzania before independence were in the first East Africa community founded in 1967 that was established before independence, the one that shared a common currency, judiciary, trade, and transport, enabled by many cultural similarities between its citizens. While Kenya was colonized by the British, who later advanced southwards to occupy Tanzania, Tanzanians were colonized by both British and at one time the Germans. The British Empire perpetuated capitalism while Germany was both a democratic and social federal state. Kenya was also under the influence of Indian laborers at one point. Before independence, Kenya and Tanzania were working so closely together to free themselves from colonial masters and to trade freely. They expected to have better trade and economic relations after independence in 1960s, but disappointment arose when the national interests of both countries differed, which made the expected partnership not to materialize. During independence, the leaders of these two countries, President Jomo Kenyatta and President Julius Nyerere, were both initially advocating for socialism, but when reality dawned, Kenya resorted to capitalism because the socialism issue was not well understood in Kenya. Kenya had only been colonized by the British, who were capitalists, while Tanzania had been familiar with socialism from the Germans. Kenya chose to be a capitalist while Tanzania chose a socialist system. Therefore, during independence, Kenya and Tanzania disagreed based on ideological foundations of their new countries, and since then, there was no shortage of stereotypes and lack of trust, as both leaders pit their citizens against each other to defend and justify the choice of the economic model they had made. Mwalimu Julius Nyerere of Tanzania created a social welfare to cushion his people from the effects of capitalism, as he felt it led to exploitation of the majority and gains to a few. He also emphasized on maintaining African traditions among Tanzanians and keeping off Western cultures. The economic model that Mwalimu Nyerere chose also emphasized on communal ownership of land, sharing, and fundraising to support one another. He was fostering the idea of a one indivisible society. His counterpart Jomo Kenyatta was fostering individualistic ideals of the capitalist economic model that promoted private ownership of properties, land being the main property at the time, self-interest with minimal government intervention, competition in trade, and a market mechanism that encouraged profit-making, a model that would lead to massive historical problems that would make the weak remain weak and the stronger remain stronger and richer. Because the two leaders were fostering different ideologies, the ties between Kenya and Tanzania broke down and the first East Africa community was dissolved in 1977. However, about 5 years later, the socialist system of Tanzania failed, and a mixed system emerged. Among the factors that caused the failure was the war with Uganda, which saw Tanzania resume its diplomatic ties with Kenya in 1983. At this time, Tanzania was playing catch-up with Kenya's economy, and the rivalry between traders in Kenya and Tanzania started heating up. Mwalimu Julius Nyerere had always justified the choice of a socialist system that encompassed communal ownership of land and state ownership of services by criticizing the growing inequality caused by capitalism. The bitterness around the choice of the different economic models became toxic, and it saw Tanzania call Kenya a man-eat society, while Kenya's Charles Njonjo returned the favor, calling Tanzania a man-eat-nothing society. When the socialist system failed, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere voluntarily resigned, but Tanzania never stopped blaming Kenyans for not choosing socialism. Socialism was not 100% bad, as it promoted ethnic unity in Tanzania, and Swahili language was used to foster nationhood, hence the reason why Tanzanians pride themselves in their master of the language. Since Kenya was not promoting the African tradition in one language, They ended up with more Western cultures, more English and lesser attention to perfect Swahili, which saw them more compatible at the international stage where English was and continues to be a highly spoken language. Years later, the stereotypes of Kenyans being materialistic and westernized owing to the material progress promoted by Jomo Kenyatta and the lack of nationhood as envisaged by Julius Nyerere would remain in the society across generations. Before independence, the model that Nyerere chose created a nationhood in Tanzania, while that of Kenyatta created tribal leaders which saw Mwa follow suit, and a leadership that would be only between two tribes, Kikuyus and Kalenjins. The divisions took center stage when Kenya was transitioning to multipartyism, which was not really a problem to Tanzanians because of their strong founded unity. The difference is that the 5 years that Nyerere tried the socialist system that later failed, Tanzania may not have had the opportunity to create so much material wealth but had a chance to heal most of the inner wounds caused by colonial masters before independence and had time to put the family Tanzania together. The failure to foster nationhood in Kenya perpetuated divisive politics and heated competition between tribes, with some feeling that Kenya belonged to them more than others, while others felt completely excluded. On the other hand, Kenyans had gained more experience of capitalist system and had learned how to search for material wealth until to date, Kenyans passionately searched to own property and make money. To Tanzanians, owing to their foundation, the search for material wealth was perceived as greed, and they are always suspicious towards Kenyans. Kenyans learned how to look for money and take advantage of every opportunity to do business. Owing to the pure capitalist approach, they face criticism and suspicion, and sometimes they cannot understand why, as searching for money is a normal way of life. Sometimes Kenyans think their neighbors are not hardworking enough and are thus envious. One thing is clear. The suspicion around Kenyans has traveled over 60 years of the country's existence to generations who have no clue what really happened. Poor leadership has seen perpetuation of stereotypes that bear no fruits. The stricter border checks on Kenyan traders by Tanzania has sometimes occasioned protests and unrest along the borders. During President Magufuli's reign, he was seen a strong man for standing up against Kenyan traders, and most of the time he revisited the historical differences in rallies. A rally would be about Kenya, and even though Kenya wrote several protest letters, that did not help. A sorry state of things in 2017 occurred where 6,400-day-old chicks exported by Kenyan traders worth $5,570 were set ablaze in Tanzania. Thereafter followed the 1,300 cows that were auctioned for apparently being grazed on Tanzanian lands. Magufuli said that Tanzania was not a feeding farm for animals. He further imposed 25% import duty on Kenya's confectionery to Tanzania in 2018. Tourist vans from Kenya were also blocked from entering Serengeti, and Kenya in return responded by limiting the entry of Tanzania vans from accessing Masai Mara National Reserve. Although Magufuli invited Kenya's President Uhuru to Tanzania, gifting him peacocks as a sign of peace, it never lasted. The COVID pandemic took the differences to the next level. A diplomatic row owing to the differences in strategies to counter COVID took a different turn. Kenya decided to lock down and foster strategies that the rest of the countries in the world and WHO were promoting, which Tanzania chose to avoid. Tanzania fought hard to make sure the strategies Kenya had chosen were less effective in curbing the disease. When Kenya decided to close its border with Somalia to prevent the spread of COVID, Tanzania locked out Kenya's trucks from entering its territory. Tanzania also issued an order blocking Kenya's airline from accessing Tanzania, which Kenya responded by banning Tanzanians from traveling to Kenya, leading Magufuli to back down on the order on Kenya's airlines. There were also instances where Kenya had to allow Tanzanians into the country and ignore their risk of potential COVID spread, because the force of the then president was too punitive and was most times characterized by quick bans to Kenyans without thinking about the risk of the disease in question that was confronting his country, Kenya, and the world at large. Today Kenyans and Tanzanians compete almost on everything. It can really get very emotional in social media. From who is more polite, to who speaks the best Swahili, to which country has the most submissive women, to who is more hardworking, or who has the best artists, to where Mount Kilimanjaro is located or who owned it before independence. The competition around who speaks the best Swahili is surprising. Swahili language originated as a lingua franca between Arabs and Bantu-speaking tribal groups in Kenya and Tanzania coast, which also went through Uganda to Congo. The difference arises on the Swahili dialect based on whether it is spoken in Zanzibar, Lamu in Kenya, or Mombasa. Not everyone in Tanzania even speaks the Swahili language. The comparison and competition between these two countries is simply to mask the historical betrayal that Tanzania feels against Kenya for choosing capitalism over socialist economic model, what the forefathers of these two countries stood for over 60 years ago. Kenya and Tanzania have different communities that share similar culture, and Swahili is widely spoken in both countries. Because Kenya is mostly Christian and Tanzania Islamic, the identities and beliefs of these two countries post-independence seem to have shifted the social systems of its people, bringing out a clear difference. But these two countries host communities that share a common language and culture. However, poor leadership and politics has seen toxic relationships between the two countries thrive. Where Kenyans and Tanzanians share resources at the border, the competition is felt more deeply, sometimes increasing differences between communities who share common culture, especially in the Lake Victoria region. The endless competition of 20th century eventually spilled over to 21st century. Healthy competition is what is lacking between these two countries, but whatever it is, Kenyans and Tanzanians must come to the realization that the generation of today need to break the cycle. The stereotypes cannot help in fostering a stronger East African community. A stronger East African community is important in fostering economic growth of the Kenya and Tanzania citizens. Poor leadership and politics only benefit a few and leave the majority poor. Here at Discover Love and Revive, we make sure Tanzanians and Kenyans awaken to this reality, by letting go the historical differences perpetuated by the forefathers of the respective countries equals to peace and prosperity for the majority.